Well, hello. Welcome to the Creative Writing Life podcast. I am Paul Zyman. I'm quite happy to welcome back to the show. It is returning guest. He is a writer, but today we're going to talk to playwright Brad Staggs because we're going to be talking all about his recent production of the show. Not he wrote it, he acted in it, he directed it, probably produced it, and probably helped build some of the sets as well. The show is called "I Love My Zombie." Brad Staggs, welcome once again to the Creative Writing Life podcast.
Hello, Paul, and thank you for having me back. I also did pizza buying every once in a while, so I guess catering, if you will.
Okay, I wasn't
So
sure if that would fall under producing, but I guess catering is kind of a separate entity.
it can be, yeah.
Okay,
So
well,
I'm very happy to be back, though. I listen every week, and this is great fun.
oh, thank you so much for listening, and yeah, it is great to have you back. Brad is an experienced writer. Actually, we will get into Brad's background in just a minute, but as regular listeners and viewers of the show are aware, we like to start things off talking about anything we may have read or watched lately. And I will go first to just give Brad a few minutes to collect his thoughts. I've watched a good number of things lately. So there is a first run movie house near my house. And so they have like stuff that's just come out, but they also do, like here's something from X number of years ago, and they seem to be on a Mel Brooks kick lately. So a couple of weeks ago, I went and saw Blazing Saddles, which I've seen a million times. The audience was a little. I think they were a little hesitant to laugh at some of the jokes, but it's weird because you've seen the movie so many times, you know all the jokes, but there's some of them still hit and they're still really funny. But the most recent one was last week. My wife and I went to see Young Frankenstein, which is one of our favorites, and to me, it's like one of the best comedies ever made. And it was a pretty packed house, which is great to see, and a lot of the laughs really still hit, and it was just a lot of fun. And that was in the movies. And on TV, I finally got to watch the final three episodes of the current season of Doctor Who, which is on Disney Plus. I'm a huge fan anyway, because I just never got time to watch the others. And I liked how they wrap things up. It wasn't the best season I've seen, but I enjoyed it. And I think Trudy Gatwa is doing a fantastic job as the Doctor. And I totally forgot that it was coming out on Amazon, so I started on the latest season of The Boys, which I have been watching. I'm not crazy about the violence, which can get really over the top, but it's since it's based on a comic book, it's comic book over the top gory violence. Make of that what you will. But I think they're doing a really good job, and I think they're going to do season 4. They think they're going to wrap things up with season 5, but I have been enjoying that, and that's pretty much it for me. So I will toss it over to Mr. Staggs.
Well, first of all, this is fascinating because the thing that I just watched yesterday was the latest Gene Wilder documentary.
Oh yeah,
That is amazing. Of course, talking about all the Mel Brooks time, talking about Young Frankenstein, talking about Blazing Saddles, and everything in Gene Wilder's life that from an amazing, amazing man. Anyway, and those of us who grew up at a certain time and grew up with Willy Wonka, the real
oh yeah.
Willy Wonka, it's a fantastic thing to watch. I believe it's Netflix. I believe.
I think you're
I'm
right. That
thinking.
sounds about right.
I'm thinking it's Netflix. But because the play we just got through doing was set in 1952, I've actually been watching a lot of older television and older movies just to get. I'm a huge Hope and Crosby Road movie fanatic,
Okay.
and of course, I Love Lucy fanatic. So I've been watching those pretty much nonstop. But I'm getting ready for I'm writing and getting ready for a documentary project. So that's why I watched the Gene Wilder documentary, watching a few other documentaries that are out there that type documentaries that I really, really like.
Okay, so what are some of the ones that I guess have been really effective for you? Like from watching them as a writer.
As a writer, the Gene Wilder, the way it's put together, the Gene Wilder documentary is fantastic because a good documentary has a theme. You know what's going to be about. With Gene Wilder, it was about how great a person he was, how great an actor he was, and uh, how improbable his career was. But told through the eyes of the people who loved him, his wife, his Mel himself, the people who were around him all the time. And that, I think, more than anything, we've all seen the documentaries that are behind the scenes of movies, that all you get out of it is, okay, here's what we did on day 1 to day 50. And that's really all it is. There's no theme. It's just, okay, here's the movie. Here's what happened. But when you start talking about people and the personalities and putting a personality on it instead of just this is about a movie, it makes a big difference, makes a big impact. That's when you get people watching it 2, 3 times because you're talking about a person, somebody they care about. In Wilder's case, somebody from our childhood, somebody who
Mm-hmm.
really impacted, for me, especially the way that he became a writer after being with Mel Brooks and realizing there are no limits,
Mm-hmm.
that writing doesn't have to stick into a specific format. And that he really made that happen with the idea for Young Frankenstein and um, things that he did even after that without Mel, that
Mm-hmm.
he didn't stick to a format.
What I also thought was really fascinating about that documentary is that when they started having the Gene Wilder like narration almost, and I
Mm-hmm.
realized when did they do this? And I had no idea that he had published an autobiography a
Mm-hmm.
couple of years before he passed away. And so they were just taking big snippets of that and using that to, I don't know, like bookend each like
Mm-hmm.
particular segment of his life. You know, here I am, like when he broke into theater. I had no idea the man was from Milwaukee either. And so and that talking about how he got into theater and then he made his way to Broadway and just the way his career developed, and it's almost like it's this fascinating and really smart way to present the Gene Wilder story by having Gene be more than just the cameras on him. It's just like you're hearing his actual words.
And for the writers, the research that they had to do to get into that
Mm.
was just mammoth. I mean, the volumes of transcripts they had to just be, folder upon folder of transcript, because they were lucky enough, yes, that he had recorded the book, but then you have to go out and you have to record the interviews and hope that you can book in those interviews into what you already have in mind.
Mhm.
Which with somebody like Wilder, you know what you're going to get from most of the people who you talk to about him. So it's not that difficult a process with him. But it's just such a well done documentary all the way around that I really advise everybody to go out and watch it, even if you've ever even heard of Gene Wilder in passing. It will give you a new respect for
Well, I would say that would be really tough because I mean, a lot of people do know him from the Mel Brooks films, but
him. Mm-hmm.
name one person who has not seen Willy Wonka, and you'd have a very short list.
Well, then name on the opposite. Name one person who has seen Sherlock Holmes's smarter brother,
Yeah,
which
yeah.
was something that he wrote and did right after Young Frankenstein. And so I'm hoping it will turn people on to a lot of the stuff that they didn't see by Gene Wilder at that point.
Sure,
Um,
sure.
but other than that, I've actually been opening up a VPN and watching a lot of overseas television because I'm addicted to a German show called Berlin, and a lot of UK television, such as Shakespeare and Hathaway. I love just little shows that barely anybody else knows.
Well, the only thing I can throw to that is my wife turned me on to Taskmaster. So
Oh
every
yes,
so every time that the a new season comes up, it's like Friday night. Okay, it's on their YouTube channel, and we watch the episode. It's 10 weeks a season, so we got 2.5 months of content right there.
there you
Oh,
go.
that is some great stuff. Okay, so let us delve just a little bit into Brad
Mhm.
Staggs' background as a writer. So like, what was your start? Were you always writing as a kid, or do you kind of like develop an interest in it later in life? Like, hey, I actually got some skills at this.
I actually wasn't so much writing as a kid. I'd write small things, but nothing long because I was a farm kid. I didn't even know you could do that as a hobby or as anything. It wasn't until I got in the Air Force in the '80s and started reading Louis Grizzard, who was a newspaper columnist for the Atlanta Journal Constitution, and then later on Dave Barry, who is a
Mm,
hero of mine, who writes out of Miami, who I was lucky enough to have on my podcast years later.
mm,
Just an amazing man. But because of their writing style, I started writing journalism and humor columns for our base newspaper, and then kept that up. And then after getting out of the Air Force, was lucky enough to meet a man named Mark Rakup, who owns Magic House Productions here in Indiana, who had already written, who I'm going to be doing a documentary about here very soon. But he had written a science fiction comedy, and he took me in, and he was also doing grunt work in rewriting Hollywood scripts, lower budget Hollywood scripts, the uncredited rewrites,
Okay.
as we did in the late '80s and the early '90s. It was all everything was rewritten. So he taught me format. He taught me story, how to go about it, and I've had the bug ever since,
So the
especially for
sci-fi
theater
comedy, that
writing.
was a screenplay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
The sci-fi comedy is, and it is actually out there, is called, ready for this title?
Oh, I'm ready.
Rock Rock and Roll Starship.
It's times like this I really wish the mom and pop video stores were still around.
Oh yes,
'Cause that's
yes.
just it. It
It
sounds wonderfully cheesy. I guess it's probably the best way to put it.
the documentary I'm making is going to be called "Last of the Great Eight" because it was made on 8 millimeter
Oh wow.
in '91. So toward the very end of 8 millimeter film, and it was a labor of love. And Mark, because of what he was, his positivity got it done
Mhm.
and made it happen. So it's really a wonderful story of how it got made. So we're working up the script for that one now.
That is fantastic. So, okay, so you said that one of the things he kind of taught you, so like a one man,
Mm-hmm.
screenwriting school, he talked to you about formatting and also about story and structure. So, was it was it hard for you to pick up because I guess you'd been so used to writing, prose or writing a more
Mm-hmm.
journalistic type material that for some writers it's tough to go from one to the other because a lot of writers think, oh, I wrote a book, oh, it's going to be a snap to convert that into a screenplay. How was it for you to, I guess, pick up those skills and also to develop it? But I guess you also had the benefit he was right there to critique or to advise.
He was there to mentor,
Mm,
by all means. And mind you, we wrote some really bad stuff because you have to write the really bad stuff to get to the decent stuff,
of course.
obviously. Um, and this was the late '80s, going into the early '90s, where everything was that really, really crappy action movie kind of stuff
Sure.
was what he was rewriting. That was, everybody had their formulaic cool things.
Wow.
But for me, it wasn't too hard getting into formula because I'd been such an avid television and movie consumer for
Hmm.
so long that, as we know, the formulas are there throughout the years. They change a little bit over the years. The '70s action films, the Smoking the Bandit versus the '80s action films, the Commandos, the Arnie's,
Yeah.
the Stallones. Everything has its own formula, but behind it all, you have to have something for people to love, something for them to glom onto, which has to be a character, a person, somebody that they can root for, somebody that they can hate, just something for them to really sink their teeth into, no matter how bad the action is or anything else around it. They have to have somebody to root for.
And that sounds like that's something you really were able to apply to your own scripts once you kind of went off on your own.
It really, the personality behind every, I always start almost every script with, what are the personalities going to be? Uh, Not necessarily good guy, bad guy, because as we know from the acting standpoint, there's no such thing as a bad guy.
Mhm,
Every quote bad guy or bad woman thinks that they are doing what they're doing for a reason, for a justification.
mhm.
It's only the good guys and possibly the audience that thinks they're a bad guy. There are people who still think that Thanos was right.
Oh, yeah, that's true
So,
because I've always heard that the antagonist sees themselves as the hero.
mhm.
That
Well,
because they what they're doing to everybody else might not be the best, but to them it's what they need to do to achieve their goal, which is what it's all about with storytelling.
and from a writer's side, it took me a long time to realize that an antagonist simply is somebody who's trying to stop the action. A protagonist is trying to move it forward. So, can a bad guy be the protagonist? Yes, because they're trying to move the story and the action forward. While the antagonist is actually, it always depends on who it is in every story. So, it's from a writer's point of view, that to me is the challenge, is making the bad guy have something that makes people go, okay, I understand why you're doing this.
Sure, sure. Because you would definitely want to avoid your antagonist being one dimensional, the mustache swirling. Okay, well, why exactly do you want to take over the world? Well, not just because, it's something to do. It's like there has to be a reasoning behind that character.
Because I'm bored. I'm
Yeah.
bored today, so I want to take over the world. That's all it is.
hmm Exactly.
Rich
So,
and bored.
of course, of course. Okay, so you're kind of like developing your writing skills, and
Mm-hmm.
you are in the service then, and we thank you for
Mm-hmm.
that. So were you able to still, I guess, devote some writing time, or was that kind of like whenever you had a little downtime, you were off duty, you were able to just kind of like, okay, I'm gonna work on 2 pages
Right.
today.
Well, because I was in the Air Force in the 80s and I got out. I was out of the service the entire 90s
Okay.
and then got back in January of 2001. But during that time, of course, getting married, trying to keep the full time job going in order to pay for the house, et cetera, and so on. But because I had Mark around and because I developed a, a society of or a ring of writers around
Mm,
me, if you will, when I was in that time period, it was amazing because we had a built-in writers room.
mm.
We would get together once a week, if nothing else, and just start bouncing ideas off each other and loving it. And no idea was out of bounds. No idea was too wacky or too somber or too serious or anything. And it was very, hey, what's going on? Hey, what if you did this? What if you did that? And having those kind of people around that you can just bounce stuff off of. I love the solitary life of being a writer, but I also like having people who understand what the solitary life of being a writer is
Oh yeah.
to bounce ideas off of. Because you can only be solitary for so long if you actually want anybody to see what
Yeah.
you're doing.
Yeah, very much because that's the thing is I always tell I have this presentation I give to people who want to learn about screenwriting. I said, writing, even though writing is primarily a solitary activity, it really helps to develop that community because
Mhm.
all of these other people know exactly what you're going through. And so you can commiserate and you can collaborate and you can go to them for advice and they can come to you if they have a question, like maybe they think you can help answer them. And I think a lot of writers don't value that as much as they should, that they have the community there, but I think maybe because a lot of writers, as we know, are for most part introverts, and so it's hard to kind of force yourself to get out there and socialize and mingle with other writers because you're gonna feel intimidated. You're gonna feel like, oh, they're just so much better at it than I am, and you don't want to come across as a loser or something. But
And
it
you have to talk to other people because you're not going to know all the knowledge you have to have for whatever you're
Mhm,
writing. Yeah,
exactly.
I've never been a forensic psychologist. So if I need that in something, I've got to talk to somebody who knows something about it. I've never dealt blackjack in Vegas, but I've got a friend that has. So what do you go through to deal blackjack in Vegas? You have to have people. Everything can't just be by yourself all the time
Mhm.
because then it becomes the same story over and over and over.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. Okay, so let us start. So you started working on screenplays,
Mhm.
and I'm sure you cranked out a couple of those, the early ones. You don't want anyone to ever know anything
They,
about, or they would never see the light of day.
I
Uh,
think I burned the house down and I wrote them in just because.
oh, that's the easy way out. Sure.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay, so and I know you got out of the service. Was it last year?
As a matter of fact, in January
Oh,
of
it was
this year.
January. Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, well, congratulations. I hope I hope the adjustment hasn't been too strenuous.
It's been an adjustment, that's for sure.
Okay, so but
Ongoing adjustment.
I know that the reason there's a little background that the reason I know Brad is that a couple of years ago he was doing the Working Writer podcast, which I know is on hiatus for the time being, and so he was working on a screenplay, and I know that I'd love to know the status of that, but we'll get to that in a minute. Uh, but I know that part of the reason I wanted to have Brad on today was because I've been following him on social media and that he wrote a play called
Mhm.
I Love My Zombie. And so I want to talk about, where did the idea for that come from? And then
Mhm.
we can kind of go into the whole, yeah, actually putting on the show part of the story. So
Yeah,
where did this idea come from?
So the
give
actual,
like
yeah,
what is the show about? That would help
sure.
people.
I Love My Zombie is actually it's a misnomer, if you will, because it's not Shaun of the Dead zombies, even though that's my favorite zombie movie. So I always have
Okay.
to bring that up. Um, it is based in 1952. So during World War II, almost every actor of age went to fight in World War II, whether they were entertainers under an Army uniform. Jimmy Stewart retired as a one-star general from the Air Force. Everybody went to fight. So, what's going to happen in 1952 when television is a very new medium? They're just coming out of radio, and the most popular show of the time is called I Love My Wife. Yes, okay, it's a takeoff on I Love Lucy, but what happens when the last thing that the German military, the Nazis, did during World War II when they were losing was release a chemical weapon that they thought would make the enemy more susceptible to suggestion. Now, it hadn't been tested, so nothing happened. Just some dust and some particulates on everybody. However, 5 years later, the people who were in that battle on those front lines start changing. They start having physical problems. So it creates four stages of what they called zombies. The first stage just had a really bad skin condition. I mean, looked like a zombie, but still normal human, for lack of a better. Stage two, same, only they could lose body parts and then actually put them back on, and they'd
Okay.
still be usable. Stage threes, the brain was starting to go, and they were just basically muscle. Stage fours were what we call the classic zombies, and they never show up on stage because they eat people, so it's kind of bad to have them on stage. Um, but the whole basis of it is, at that time we had the Hays Code in effect. The Hays Code had a thing called miscegenation. And this is real. Miscegenation said you cannot mix races in television and movies. You could not show an African American and a white person having kissing or having any kind of relationship on screen. In our world, that also extended to zombies then, what they called zombies. All of a sudden, they had become a different race. So, how do we feel about those? And it also came about by the fact that Will Hayes, who was the senator who brought about the Hays Code, was from Indiana. Yay,
Ah.
us. So Indiana tie for us. Not a good one, but still an Indiana tie. So fast forward to 1952, the most popular television show, the lead male has turned into this stage one zombie. How do you keep a television show going with the Hays Code, even though they're popular, with a portion of America starting to hate zombies and a guy out there who is actually publishing pamphlets and publishing in the newspaper wanting to outlaw all zombies and send them all to internment camps because he fears them all.
Hmm.
So how do you deal with people's hatred? How do you deal with people changing? How do you deal with the thoughts that people have about other people based on absolutely no science?
Hmm. Wow, what a fascinating topic, and it's such a unique and different way to approach that topic because you never would have thought they would take like the I Love Lucy approach or have that be the setting for this kind of story. So okay, so you came up with the idea. So how long did it take you to put the whole thing together writing wise?
Well, originally, as we back up, my wife and I and a theater producer we had at the time named Scott Luter, were sitting having a couple of, shall we say, adult beverages at a bar where all good ideas are formed.
Okay.
And we had just gotten through doing a play, and they were looking for a play to do in the October timeframe. And we'd already done Dracula, we'd already done Frankenstein, we'd done all the classics that are out there. And Scott looked at my wife, who is a director, and said, "What if we do one about zombies?" And I will never forget my wife to this day looking at both of us and going, "There's no such thing as a good play about zombies."
Oh,
And
wow.
all I said was, "Challenge accepted."
Of course.
And because I love that time period of entertainment,
Hmm.
I decided that it was going to be set in that time period. And then everything else just kind of fell into place around that. And then it took, I actually have them here then for the, in from May, my glasses on. Yeah. March to May of 87, I used military notebooks and wrote the first edition longhand
Oh my
from,
gosh.
from beginning to end in two military notebooks.
Oh, wow.
Um, in my off time, just sit there. Before I got too old and arthritis started kicking in, I wanted to write something longhand
Of course, of course.
again.
So what was it a challenge or what, I guess you must have had fun kind of like, okay, there are all these tropes and cliches
Mm-hmm.
affiliated with, zombie stories. Did you have fun kind of like incorporating them or like, oh, hey, what's a
Oh
unique
yes.
twist I could put on this other thing?
Oh yeah. There's a part in the play where we've already talked about stage 4 zombies, and one of the stage ones looks at another one and who is he's the head of the zombie actors union in Hollywood.
Of
It's
course.
all in Hollywood. And he looks at this lead actor and says, "You know, we need to make a movie about these guys, these zombies who go around eating other people." And the lead actor says, "No, people hate us enough the way it is. We can't be doing stuff like that." But all the tropes are in there because we can't, and it's tropes of the time period as well. The
Oh,
head of the
wow.
zombie actors union has diversification and money and everything to include a Brooklyn baseball team because he wants to see West Coast baseball. Um, it
That's
really is a
great.
love. It's a love letter to Hollywood of that time period, as well as just being a zombie thing.
And also there's it's not like there's no gore or anything because
No,
it's a family
well,
oriented kind of production.
it is. However, body parts do fall off.
Yeah, yeah, but no, but I've seen some of the show, and so I know
Yeah,
like someone's hand falls off, and it's not like there's suddenly blood spurting everywhere. And Brad just ran off and guessing to get a prop. Yep, there's a hand.
I have to have the hand, of course. That's as gory as the play gets, right there.
Hmm.
And that's from a Hollywood prop house. So I took a great great advantage of getting things from Hollywood that could be incorporated in the play.
Sure,
Got a
sure.
newspaper from Earl Hayes Press that's used in everything, you know, little things that people don't notice, but I notice, and it just made me happy.
Okay, well, okay. So that kind of leads to the next set of questions. Okay, so you've written the show, and so now they say, okay, we're going to put it
Mm-hmm.
on. So now it's kind of up to you. Like, so you wrote it, and who decided? Did you initially write it with the intention that you were going to act in it and direct it, or was it kind of like, oh, the director, hey, Brad, we need one more thing from you?
No, I wasn't going to have anything to do with it once it hit the stage. To be perfectly honest, we did a staged reading in 2019 just to get the feel of how it would be, and it went through a couple of name changes that I didn't like because some people said, "Well, you put the word zombie in it, it's going to turn some people off," and so I tried a few different name changes, but then I finally realized the word zombie will make people want to come see
Hmm.
it. I mean, more than anything, if you can't just, I love my zombie, just the name alone makes people go, okay, that sounds fun. So we did a stage reading in 2019. Then 2 years ago, the producer and owner of Hyperion, the Hyperion Players in Indianapolis, actually in Noblesville, just north of us, came to me and because he's wanting to do more original plays in this area, and he had read a copy, and he asked me if we could do it with him, with Hyperion, and we said absolutely. Me thinking that I was going to be busy and I wouldn't be able to be involved. Well, then I retire from the military. Um, One thing leads to another. I end up directing it, which that's fine. We're going through auditions, fantastic auditions, lots of great people, and at the end of it, um, everybody on my staff looked at me and said, "You have to do this detective character because nobody can read it as
Oh,
well as
wow.
you can."
Because
I had
so
no intention of being in it at all.
Okay, yeah. So just a little background for the audience here that the detective it's almost like a Greek chorus
Mm-hmm.
kind of
It is.
character that pops in
Mm-hmm.
every once in a while, gives a little background information, then and then zips off stage.
Yeah, the detective and his niece Tammy
Hmm.
are the Greek chorus of the play. My whole thing, I love theater, but the thing I hate about going to theater, especially if you're doing community theater, are the long scene changes. You can
Oh,
sit there in the dark for it seems like minutes, and I have some have been timed at minutes, and the scene should just keep going and going.
yeah.
The Greek chorus, the detective, and the niece were brought up as a way to make those scene changes literally in front of the audience with the lights on. They don't get a chance to leave the play or get their mind out of the play. They're staying with you all through the entire first act until intermission, and then they're ready for a second act.
So were those characters initially part of the story, or was that kind of like something you came up with like during the like I don't know, I don't want to say rehearsal process, but when you were
Mm-hmm.
writing it, did you think, okay, I need these characters to cover up the scene
Mm-hmm.
changes?
They are actually part of the original because
Hmm.
the long scene changes have always been a pet peeve of mine. And so I wanted to show that you could write something so that it keeps the audience involved, keeps the audience entertained. Especially, this is not a musical. So
Right.
it's not like they have songs that after each scene they're going to be humming through the scene change. So you have
Okay.
to keep them engaged in some way. And the fun thing about that detective and the niece is the fact that they break the fourth wall. They talk directly to the audience. So if somebody showed up late, which I think in the version
Yeah,
that's
yeah, it's like the
online,
very beginning of the show.
I do actually thank somebody for showing up late and ask them why they came in late. So it makes it more personal with the audience too. The audience thinks they have somebody that they can actually relate to and talk back to during the entire play as well. And
And
they
it,
they
it,
did talk
it,
back a few times.
and it also helps set the tone of the
Mm-hmm.
show as well, because you're going in thinking, okay, this is called I Love My Zombie. Is it going to be silly? Is it going to be farcical? And and there's it's got a sense of humor to it, and then I
Mm-hmm.
think that helps put an audience at ease because they know, like, oh, I'm in for a fun evening to see this show, and I have an idea of what it's about. And okay, so this guy's telling jokes. He's he's doing crowd work almost with the audience, and so that helps get them organized and kind of like gets them a little more interested in than they probably expected to be.
Mm-hmm. It is really something to engage the audience, because the more you can keep an audience engaged, especially when you're talking community theater or a theater where on the day that the recording happened, a lot of the crowd were older folks, which was
Oh, okay.
great for this play because they remember
Yeah, oh, yeah. They're
what
familiar with the
television,
what
what the
it's
world
like.
was like at that time.
Sure.
And it was there was a lot of laughter because I do jokes about you'll outlive Jack Benny, and people love that because
Hmm.
they were that age. um, so it really makes a difference depending on what the age of the audience is, but you have to also make it so that a younger audience can get it. There were
Mm.
jokes that I did put in that I thought that everybody would get, that had to be explained even to some of our cast members,
Oh, wow. Can you give an
because I have
example of one?
certainly I have a joke in there. There's a running gag. The joke itself, it's a bad vaudeville style joke, which is why was Samson Delilah's favorite comic? Because he always brought down the house.
Okay.
And for me, being raised in a church environment, Samson at the end of his life brought down the pillars of the building. I
Sure.
thought that everybody knew the story of Samson and Delilah. We had cast members we had to explain
Oh,
Samson and Delilah to.
wow.
And it made me realize, okay, jokes that I think everybody is going to get, not always there for
Okay.
everybody.
Okay. So one of the things you mentioned earlier is that you did a table read. Now,
Mm-hmm.
was it the same group, or was that just a different set of actors?
The only person involved in the final, well, there were two actors involved in the final production that were involved in the table read. One who in the finished production plays Carl, who is the head of the Zombie Actors Union, came to the table read to. We have a character called the Zombie Stagehand.
Hmm.
He's a stage three. He or she is a stage three zombie who is just the muscle. They move things around. They're the key grip.
Okay.
They wire things. They just move heavy objects. He came to the stage reading, even though there were no lines for him. So he was there, and then he ended up being Carl. And then my friend Jerry Robbins, who played Cy, who is a vaudeville comedian
Hmm.
and has a kids show, even though he's a stage 2 zombie and losing body parts. When I write, I have to have somebody's voice in my head.
Hmm.
Normally, it's Samuel L. Jackson because I love his voice and
Okay.
everything will be written for him. But for the part of when I was reading it, I've known Jerry since 1990, and his voice was the one in my head for that character. And he followed through with it, and it was actually in the play itself. He did the stage reading, he did the play, and it made me so happy because it was exactly what I heard in my head because I knew his timbre and his voice.
Oh, that is fantastic. So one of the things that I always find, especially when you do a table read, and then I guess when you were doing the early stages of rehearsal, were there any kind of like tweaks or changes to the script? Like, oh, this character said, "Oh, my character would never say that," or actually, I think we can tighten this scene. We can probably cut like these three lines. Was it that kind of editing and revising as you were going through the process?
The biggest things to, especially if you're going to write a play, to keep in mind is you're not always going to get the number of males or females that you want.
Hmm.
So two of the characters were crosscast, male to female. The character of Michael, who was the assistant director on the television show, ended up being a female, a very good actress who played it as a male. And then we added a line in the second half after, how am I going to say this? Spoiler alert, she's murdered. Um, but in the second half, the detective adds a line where he looks at the cast of this television show and says, "You didn't know that he was a she? Really? You work with her every day."
Mhm.
So we were able to do that because she was just so good at that part. And the part of my niece, Tammy, was originally Tommy,
Oh, wow.
but she was the right age and she did very, very well. So it ended up being niece. Um, with very few exceptions, you can't leave yourself so hamstrung that it has to be one or the other. Now there will be exceptions. The television show actors had to be who they were.
Hmm.
Um, but if you have characters that can be male or female, do that. Make them male or female. When you're sending out your specs, when you're sending out the drafts, notate that this could be male or female playing this part.
Oh, that's great. So, okay, so you're going through the rehearsal process, and so
Mm-hmm.
it's getting closer to opening night. And so, I mean, what was kind of like, I guess, the buzz around the set? Do people like, this was so much fun to work on. I can't wait to, we can't wait to open the curtain and just to, like do it for real in front of a real audience. I mean, so like a lot of writers, like they always daydream about like, when their script or their book or whatever is finally unleashed on the public. So what was like, you're not just the writer, but you're also in it and you're the director. I mean, this must have been like just such a labor of love. And you're like, I can't believe it's finally here.
It was very much a labor of love, not just for me, but for everybody who was in it, because I already knew most of the people who ended up being in it. And the people that I hadn't met before ended up just melding into our group really well. But because I was directing and in it, I didn't really have time or a chance to stand back
Hmm.
until literally opening night and go, okay, we're coming up on it. We're coming up on it, because I was too busy with the directing and trying to memorize my own lines, which amazingly hard, um, and doing the other things that were necessary. It wasn't until I got to the theater and I made some social media posts about this, but I picked up the keys and got into the theater before anybody else very early. The only thing on in the theater was the ghost light on the stage.
Hmm.
And it was just that we're actually here feeling. It was before any of the set was loaded in, before anybody had gotten there. And it was just that feeling of, for the next several days, this is my theater.
Wow.
This is where my production is going to be. I wrote what's going to be on that stage for the next several days. And it's one of those few times that I just allowed myself to just breathe it in, take a moment and breathe it in and go, That's amazing
Yeah.
because to we both have talked to so many writers that can't get whatever they're writing produced or in front of the right people.
Hmm.
And yes, it's community theater, it's Indianapolis, it's not LA, it's not New York, it's not Chicago, but live, it was there. It's something that is a moment in time. And even though I recorded the final day, there are memories from the other days that are just as strong because with theater, once it's gone, it's gone.
Yeah.
Literally, you're not going to get that same night back. So it was that moment in the dark theater that just made me stop and just go out of my mind for a moment.
That's fantastic. That is something that every writer really, they want to happen, and some people say that deserve to have that happen, but it is a struggle just to like. It's one thing to write, slave and toil and write something, but then to all see it through the whole process of having it actually produced and it's on stage or it's on screen for people
Mhm.
to read or watch or just enjoy in person. And that's a very small percentage of writers who actually finish stuff, which is also a small percentage. So it's just that really you must have just been overwhelmed with the sense of like, I did this. This is all because of me, and not of ego, just like out of pride.
It wasn't even so much I did this, except for that one moment where I was like, this empty stage is going to be mine for the
Sure.
next several days. Um, it really was okay. Yes, I wrote it, but look at what we've all brought together on this stage because especially with theater, there's no
Mhm.
way anybody can do it alone. Even a one person show, you still have to
Yeah.
have lighting, you have to have makeup, you have to have everything that goes along with it. Nobody does theater alone unless you're just out on the street corner busking. But when you're talking about a production, it's they're the production meetings, the set manufacturer, the everything that went along with it. um Lil One of my favorite things, whether it be TV show, film, theater, are Easter eggs, things that you see in it that just very few people know. And there's a 3.5 foot by 3.5 foot box that somebody gets put in at the end of Act One, and the my set designer called me and said, "Is there anything special you want put on the box? Where does it go to? Shipping container?" And I said, "Well, I used to in 2000, 2001, I worked at Disney World and the Adventurers Club." And I said, "Here's the Adventurers Club logo," and showed her that. And she actually put that on the box. Nobody outside of me saw it, but it was just those little touches that for me made me go, that's the photos on the mantle were my mother and father from the 1950s.
Oh wow.
The little touches that I love, putting little things here, every so often, just here and there.
Oh, that's great. That is really nice. Okay, so how many I guess how many shows did you do?
We were able to do 4 shows.
Okay.
Unfortunately, that's all the time the theater had for us to get in and get out. But we did 4 days, and it was. We wish we would have had a second and third weekend, but unfortunately, with community theater, everybody has jobs, and we all have
Sure.
commitments that we have to go do other things. But it gave me enough to know what works and what doesn't.
Okay. So, okay, that leads to the inevitable follow-up question, or questions. The first one is, are there any plans to do it again, maybe somewhere else? And also, the other question is, what's next?
The answer to the first question is anybody who would like to do I Love My Zombie or read it. I'm on New Playwright Network, and you're more than welcome to have a copy of it and do it at your place. I'm getting ready to market it now that the video's on YouTube. I haven't made that public yet, but it will be made public next week, so that we can begin marketing what's going on. And I've made sure that the music that was used in the play is original music that Zach wrote for me, and so we'll be able to actually market that with the play itself. And that'll be the next step for Zombie. As far as what's next, I told you about the documentary that we're getting ready to really get started on this coming weekend. It's been was 91. Oh my gosh, 34 years in the making. So I've been for video people, I've been upscaling old videotapes from 1991
Mm,
for the past week, getting
wow.
ready for that. Because that's everything that was done behind the scenes at that time was all on a handheld VHS camera.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I was going to say with the grainy, you got to make sure the tracking is on and
Yeah.
all that fun stuff. So I also want to ask, so I mean, having gone through the experience of writing the show and then putting it on, do you have any desire to do it again? Like just write another original play
Oh
and
yeah.
then see it
Oh
through to
yes.
production?
I have uh, I have two other plays that are written right now, and I'm hoping to get those out there in the public. Uh, because after the actors found out how this one was written, they decided during the cast party to give me another uh, dare, if you will, on what to write. So I now have to come up with something funny with Vikings that is more historically accurate than the show Vikings. So I'm
Okay.
starting my Viking research, if you will, at this
Okay.
point
I
in
see.
time.
I immediately went to How to Train Your Dragon because those are Vikings as well, but it's also animated
Mm-hmm.
and you've got dragons. So that might be a little tougher to pull off on stage, but you never know. It could at least be an influence for you. Okay. So this has just been a great story because you do hear about so many writers who trying to get their stuff out there, but for someone to actually see it through just beyond writing that to production and have it actually be produced and have an audience and then be able just to like look back and say, not that it was again, not that it was all you, but just kind of like look what I was able to accomplish with all these fantastic people.
Mm-hmm.
Like they were able to give life to the words that I wrote.
The advantage for a writer for being a playwright is that even after it's produced, I still own it.
Hmm.
The playwright still owns their writing even after it's produced anywhere, as opposed to screenwriting where once you sell it,
Yeah,
it
it's
belongs to
gone.
whoever.
Yeah.
So it's much easier as a playwright to go, okay, I had it produced over here. Hey, look, I still own it. I can change it if I want, do other things with it. So that makes it much nicer. But I always say that you've got to have, we are in, and you and I have talked about this before, we're in a time where if you want to make something and put it out, you can.
Hmm.
You can use a phone to put something out. There are free editors online. You can do anything you want. Get a YouTube channel and just put it out there, no matter what it is. You and I, your podcast here, the podcast I had, it's not a difficult thing to get stuff out there. What you have to ask yourself as a writer is it a hobby or a career?
Hmm.
And how do you make it either one? Yes, I like having a job because I like having that steady paycheck coming in every week. And
Sure.
I live in Indiana. I don't live in LA, so I don't get the just go see somebody opportunities that LA has, even and with along with the other million writers that are there as opposed to
Mhm.
here. But yes, it does take contacts. Yes, it does take knowing people. But you got, even for us introverts who are writers, we still have to go meet those people and we have to get to know them, or else it's just a hobby.
Yeah, yeah. So let's wrap things up. So what
Hmm?
uh, key piece of advice or pieces of advice would you give to writers who maybe think, I've always wanted to try writing a play. Should I give it a go? Should I just, start small with like a one actor, or you just write a scene? Like, what advice would you give to someone who wants to get into playwriting?
Well, the first piece of advice is the same advice we all give to people wanting to get into screenwriting: consume the media.
Hmm.
If you're going to be a screenwriter, if you want to be a TV writer, watch TV. If you want to be a film writer, watch film. If you want to write for theater, go to plays. You
Hmm.
can't just start writing for theater because there's so many different elements to it. There's the 2 act structure, there's short plays, there's 3 acts, there's Shakespeare if you want to be completely insane about it. Um, you also have to know what you want your end goal to be, because there are people who make a living off of writing 1 acts, and that's fine, but that's a completely different mindset of writing than a 2 act play, because you have to get everything in 10 pages in a 1 act. Beginning, middle, end, everything has to be 10 pages, and that's it. as opposed to a 2 act, which is like writing a screenplay where you have to map it out. You have to know where you're going and what you're going to do. So my first piece of advice: go to plays, go to the media that you want to be part of, see what's out there, read scripts. We all know scripts are everywhere online. You can download and read scripts all day long, but then learn formatting, because a lot of people won't, and it's the same way in screenplay. There are a lot of people that won't read an improperly formatted script, and especially those veteran actors, veteran producers won't look at something if it looks amateurish. You need to learn how things are put together. You need to learn the way the story is put together. And that only comes from seeing things and reading things. And then hopefully get a mentor that's been doing it for quite a while who can show you the ropes, tell you what to do. And we're online today. We all can get mentors real easy. It may cost a little money sometimes, but people are out there
Yeah,
in order to
very,
do that.
very much so. Brad, this has been great stuff, and congratulations on the show, because that is something, because it's something a lot of writers aspire to. We talked about, you've got the T-shirt, you got the poster behind you on the wall, you've got the merch just to show like, hey, this
That's
this is
right.
some this is something that I did.
That's right. I have somewhere around here. I have the program. Oh, there it is. See, I even have a program, so
Oh
I
wow.
know it happened. So, physical evidence. And
Okay.
every writer wants to be on your podcast. So I thank you for allowing me the time to come on here and talk about my little play and what we're doing out here in the little Midwest, as opposed to out there in the big cities.
This was great. So Brad, so where can people find out more about you, and also if they want to find out about reading the script for the show?
I'm available on Facebook, literally just Brad Staggs. Facebook. I'm on my ex known as Twitter, whatever you want to call it now, and Instagram all the time. And I'm on the New Playwrights Exchange, which is a website where new playwrights can actually go put their stuff to get out there and be discovered on New Playwrights Exchange. And it's a really, really good site.
Okay, that is great stuff. And also, we also touched on this briefly, that you were doing the Working Writer podcast, which is on hiatus now. Are there plans to bring it back?
There are. It's just a matter of in what form, because here it will probably be on toward Christmas, but I am planning on bringing it back. It's just a matter of getting the right people in the right place, and having the right time, as
Uh,
always.
I was gonna say, having time to do it as well,
At
especially
all, at all,
especially yeah,
yeah.
especially when you're a writer. Okay, so Brad Staggs, the show is called I Love My Zombie. Brad, thank you so much for being here today. This was just fantastic stuff.
Paul, it is a pleasure as always, and I thank you very
And
much.
thank you for that hand. I appreciate it. All right,
Always
so
give you a hand.
all right, that one was all messed up because of the audio. But Brad, thank you again so much for being here today. Viewers, listeners, feel free to like and subscribe. Tell all your friends, say they should really check out this podcast, because I can use the audience boost. And again, it's Brad Staggs. Excuse me. And you can check out my screenwriting blog, Maximum Z, at maximumz.blog. I'm on Twitter, because I'm not calling it that other thing. It's at maximum_Z. I'm also on Instagram at Pez Screenwriting, PEZ. Like you said, he is Brad. I'm Paul. This has been the Creative Writing Life podcast. Thanks for listening. Stay safe, stay healthy, and most importantly, go write something.